Justice John Paul Stevens spent 35 years on the Supreme Court, writing some of the court's most important decisions. Today, at 99 years old, he's still writing and weighing in on some of the country's most controversial issues. Judy Woodruff caught up with Justice Stevens last month, and he shared his thoughts on everything from President Trump to how a childhood accident shaped his future views on gun ownership.
Today, John Paul Stevens remains one of the titans of American law, owing mostly to his long Supreme Court tenure, which spanned decades. Even in retirement, he has stayed in the public eye, bow tie and all. A Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2012, 2 previous books about the court and the Constitution published in 2011 and 2014. As he turns 99, the retired justice has written another, The Making of a Justice, Reflections on My First 94 Years. And he is opening up, carefully, about current affairs and even the current president.
I'm not a fan of President Trump, I should say. I wouldn't try to comment on every particular issue in which we disagree, but there are plenty of them.
And his effect on the country as president?
I don't think it's been favorable.
Can you elaborate?
Well, that's not part of my responsibility as a judge, and I think I should not try to get involved in the politics as a retired judge.
Stevens' new book of reflections begins in Chicago with his family's hotel business and an encounter his father, Ernest Stevens, had with one infamous Chicagoan.
There are extraordinary anecdotes in here. Your father had a meeting with Al Capone.
Well, he said he did, and I assume he's telling me the truth.
Stevens writes that his father and other hotel men in the city thought it important to persuade industry groups to hold their conventions in Chicago. His father and another hotel manager paid a visit to Al Capone, explained how Chicago's hotel business might be affected if any conventioneers were robbed, and asked for his help. According to my father's account, Stevens continued, Capone said he understood, and in fact, there was not a single holdup in Chicago during the week of the convention. Stevens also recalls his own home being invaded in the winter of 1933, and a gun fired by an older brother, Jim, in the aftermath. Stevens wrote, despite threatening comments and behavior by the armed intruders, a neighbor came the closest to being a victim of a real tragedy when Jim's shot so narrowly missed him.
Did that have an effect on your thinking later about the judicial system?
Well, yes, it did. And I've thought about that frequently for the fact that these accidents can happen when there are too many guns around, and that has reminded me of reasons to be opposed to the Second Amendment.
Stevens was on the High Court in 2008, dissenting when Justice Antonin Scalia and other conservative colleagues voted in a landmark case to say that the Second Amendment does establish an individual right to bear arms.
It's one of the 3 very, very bad cases, and it was particularly bad. There's no doubt about that.
Do you worry that that is something that is going to stand for a long time and will continue to have repercussions in this country?
Oh, yes, I certainly do.
The other 2 rulings in that category that Stevens opposed at the time and laments to this day are the pivotal Bush v. Gore ruling deciding the 2000 presidential election and the landmark Citizens United ruling in 2010 on campaign finance during Stevens' final term.
It's clear how strongly you feel that Citizens United was wrongly decided. Why do you think it's had a corrosive effect on American politics?
Just look at the amount of money. I can't give you the figures, but the millions and millions of dollars are spent on campaigns now. And often there's state representatives spending money provided by residents of other states. People in the district should be the ones who decide the outcome of elections.
Since his own departure, the court has not had to weigh in on a major Second Amendment or campaign finance case, but it has dealt several times with cases involving the death penalty and its implementation.
My own thinking, it took quite a while to really reach the conclusion that the death penalty does more harm than good. It's a terribly expensive and really pointless process because I think it accomplishes very little that can't be accomplished with more humane punishment.
But right now, the court is still divided on the issue.
Yes.
But you believe eventually the death penalty will be done away with in this country?
Oh, yes, I think it certainly will.
Today's court retains the conservative tilt that existed throughout much of Stevens' tenure, and since the installation of its newest justice, Brett Kavanaugh, some liberal groups have questioned whether some precedents, like the Roe v. Wade ruling on abortion rights, will remain.
It looks as if the people who feel strongly anti-abortion want the court to take this up and do away with Roe v. Wade.
Well, it could happen. I just don't know what's on the agenda for other justices. But it did seem to me that that was not a very controversial topic at the time of my appointment. Nobody asked me a single question about abortion during my hearings. Later, opposition became more organized and more effective. But I can't predict what's going to happen in the near future. But in the long run, it seems to me that abortion is a necessary procedure that will be recognized and will be performed lawfully.
As for his former colleagues, Stevens helped swear in the current Chief Justice, John Roberts, in 2005. Despite any ideological differences, Stevens still holds Roberts in high esteem.
I trusted him implicitly. I have the highest regard for him as a lawyer, and I must confess I was disappointed at some of his decisions after he came on the bench that were much more conservative than I expected. But on the whole, I think he's still a very well-qualified person.
But in the end, most of Stevens' new book serves as an account of how he himself has managed and sometimes failed to shape American law.
You have a remarkable legacy on the court. You served for 35 years. What do you believe your legacy will be?
Well, it's difficult to figure out, but I'd like people to think I was an honest judge and a good judge. And I always try to reach the best result in every case.
Justice John Paul Stevens, thank you very much for talking with us.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it.